My name is Rachel Joy Victor. I'm the co-founder of FBRC.ai. I come from a background of studying computational neuroscience and spatial economics. I worked as a narrative designer and world builder, including for Alex McDowell, the production designer of Minority Report. I led design and strategy at a brand innovation studio for clients like Nike, Crocs, Vans, and a number of others. And out of all of that work in strategy and design was seeing a gap in tooling around enabling content production, making it easier to create interactive and immersive experiences, and making it more cost efficient and likely for people to create all forms of content. And so I co-founded FBRC.ai, where I am right now. FBRC.ai is a company focused around building the new AI-enabled tooling ecosystem for content production. For me, for something to be immersive, it has to have something that activates the environment or a kind of spatial context in some way, even if it's like a digital spatial context. And it needs to have something that gives a role for the individual at the center of it. So you're not just kind of a passive observer. You are, even from the point of being immersed in the situation as kind of maybe the lowest point of agency, to actually being a participant in a story world and having impact on narratives that happen. I think there's a whole spectrum of what immersive can be like, but it assumes that you're designing specifically for people within it. I think working with brands and helping them think through immersive has been really interesting because it's a bit of a values clash in a way. On one hand, brands have the desire to get people to make a purchase, right? There's the goal of selling something at the end of an experience. And on the other hand, brands want to build a longer term relationship. They want to be able to tell a story, and they want to think about loyalty. So helping brands think through immersive and think through the way that multi-platform experiences, the longer term kind of immersive engagements in the context of the metaverse, in the context of virtual products, helping them think through the value of all of these things in terms of lifetime value, in terms of the longer term benefits, has been really interesting in terms of framing the idea of like return on experience. When I design for immersive, I think I start with the constraints first, because immersive can mean so many different things, and you need the constraints to shape the box that you're working within. I think those constraints include what is the technologies that you're working with, what is the medium itself, what is the format of final delivery, where is the point of interaction of the audience. Those are all kind of core considerations that shape what you can or can't do. And then once you know the bounds of that, that kind of defines what the output is going to be, you can work backwards. I think the other kind of point of starting is to define the world and to design kind of the rules and the systems that make up the world. And then once you have this world as the canvas and you have all your technological constraints defined, you can really start designing what the specific immersive experience looks like. It's always so fun to design for companies that are really pushing the bounds of what immersive is. I think the challenge is that when you're working across new formats, you don't have the rules of production defined. So it's a really tactical kind of challenge of what is a sequence of things? Who does what first? What are the titles that people have? Who reports to who? And who makes decisions in what order? When does a design decision happen and when is it finalized? Because usually in immersive and interactive design, sometimes the process of creation is iterative, but you also need to lock things at a certain point for production. So when you're working with emerging mediums, and it's not something like gaming or it's not something like film where you kind of have a sense of those checkpoints in production, I think it becomes challenging because you have to kind of create what your production roadmap is going to be. There's multiple ways to see the user. You can see them from a consumer standpoint, right? Which is how do they want to spend money within the immersive experience at one level. You can see them from a functional standpoint, which is where you're thinking about accessibility, the way they move throughout the space, wayfinding, and all of those considerations. And then you see them as a participant in the story world. And that's when you're thinking about like progression in the story and their character progression and their character identity. And each of those forms of identity need to be accounted for and often have different stakeholders attached to them. When I work in those design projects, it's trying to bring all of those views of the user together and understand that they're separate, but also honor and, design for each of them. World building means so many things to so many different people. I think historically, there's obviously world building in the context of fantasy. J.R.R. Tolkien's an excellent world builder, and he started from the point of view of language. There's world building in games, and they start from a different kind of standpoint of the scene design and like the environment's very important. I personally was influenced a lot by Alex McDowell, who was the production designer for Minority Report. He worked with the director Steven Spielberg in a unique way. So usually the world in a film comes after the story is written. It's just kind of the background to the story. And instead in Minority Report, Alex kind of came on define the world with a bunch of researchers to think through what will the world look like in X number of years, and start to really think through infrastructure and transportation and interfaces and all of these things of like, how will the world tangibly look different? That mindset around world and story relationship has had a big impact on how I think about world building. I tried to think across a couple of layers. There's the systems design of the world, which is all of these rules of what does infrastructure look like? What does energy look like? What are natural resources? But I try to think about how those things are shaped by the value systems of the world, because I don't think that any of those things and the way that they exist in our world come from a vacuum, right? The way that we think about resources, the way we think about economy, all of these like, kind of driving forces are shaped fundamentally by our values. And then I try to think about how all of these things result spatially. All of these things that feel abstract about, where do people get educated, what do they do for work? You really have to start thinking about how those things play out in the real world. If this is what people do for work, where do they go do it? How do they get there? Where do they spend the money they earn from that? Or is there another system of value exchange, right? All of those things start to get more concrete when you start to design what it actually looks like in a spatial way. And then you see the gaps and you go back and design the systems more. And then you come back and you loop between those things. So I looked into the neuroscience of presence, right? Which is, how do we feel present? How do we feel like we're immersed in another context when we're in virtual reality? And how does that interface with character embodiment, which is another level deeper? I feel that I'm this character that I'm taking on in the VR experience, right? We need to understand how people feel situated in the experience and the distinctions of like what do they feel like they can take on within a story. Designing for the individual, it's been a really helpful lens through which to think. On the functional end, it helps me think through, how does the brain work? What are ways we can kind of cheat the brain a little bit? In VR, for instance, your brain is very easily tricked about space. So you don't need to have 90-degree angles in a room. Even if there is like a sharp corner, you can actually turn people around and like reuse the space in different ways. Or you can make them feel like they're teetering on the edge of a cliff just by giving them like a 1-inch lip off the floor. And then on the consumer side, there's so much around like behavioral thinking, how people relate to brands, how people relate to self, and how that kind of impacts the business model and where they choose to spend money and all of those things. I think for me, there's definitely through lines of, I really loved storytelling and I really loved interactive storytelling. Like I remember trying to create a 4D movie experience with my siblings when I was growing up, or planning really interactive scavenger hunt themed birthday parties for my siblings. Transitioning that to a career was a challenging step, actually, because I didn't know what those interests meant in terms of a career. The through line I followed and kind of the instinct I followed was that I was always really interested in the way we relate to these things. Like I remember when I was writing stories in high school, I would get really kind of existential about like, where does the story exist within the world? Like, is this a manuscript that knows it's about the world? Like, is it kind of self-aware? What's the meta kind of nature of it? All of those questions were really interesting to me, and I think are what drove me towards the neuroscience side of things, in a way of like trying to understand those questions of like how we relate to story and how we relate to technology. But on the creative side, I think I was really confused for a while after graduation around what that meant. I had obviously this like technical degree. I had a lot of work and research, but not necessarily an understanding of what that translated to for myself. If I look at my like business cards or the ways that I branded my website, there was like, a time I thought I was a producer, a time I thought I was an interactive designer. And I think all of those things have been a piece of what I'm doing. What's really helped is always reevaluating where I am, what I wanted to do, and I chose a route of working more as an independent contractor and having the ability to kind of move quickly through different types of projects and different types of roles that let me try a lot of different things. I think the challenge is always like, how do you tell that as a complete story? I've learned to be comfortable with that story being a little bit messy. There are periods of time that it feels very divergent, but it does eventually converge. The great thing about the last couple of years is seeing how all those pieces are starting to like fit together. Transitioning from being an independent and the flexibility of that to like working with other people to start something new is a big shift. For me, it came out of the vision to me of what I wanted immersive to be and what I wanted experiential to be. My undergrad was in neuroscience, so I was really interested in what is the future of experience from a human level. I went back and got a graduate degree in spatial economics to try to understand how do we map the context and the world context from a data level. And both of those things made me start to understand that experience was evolving in a way to be more ambient and to be more distributed, with hopefully still continuity for the individual, right? With hopefully still a through line. And one area of that is, I think, personal computing and understanding, what our human relationship to technology is. But another aspect of that is obviously storytelling. How do we tell stories in this new context has always been kind of the goal. But to enable that, as a designer, I was seeing all of these gaps on the tooling side. I wanted experiences that were able to understand both of those elements of context, the human context and the spatial context, well, and to bring that into the experience and to be more responsive and to have more structures of emergent storytelling instead of just linear or nonlinear storytelling. And I wasn't seeing the tools to easily do that. I think there was a way to make it, but it was a lot of work. And scaling it in a way to be more responsive, to be more persistent, more continuous was really challenging. Because I had that background in neuroscience and computational neuroscience and seeing where AI was, I'd kind of tracked where it was at through the years. And it finally felt like it was at a point where it could actually solve for some of those issues as a designer. And so that got me really excited of, okay, if in 10 years, in 5 years even, I want to build the types of persistent worlds, story worlds that I want to see, we're gonna need the tools to exist. And I've been so close to that process that I want to be part of shaping what those tools look like so it actually reflects what I want as a designer. That was kind of the driving force behind starting Fabric AI, and I think the fact that I had a background in strategy, that I did a lot of work also in product design, made me feel really confident that there were things I could bring into the space in helping shape what the next era of tools could look like. I'm thinking through all kind of aspects of design, like strategic design, of working with our startups and helping them think through kind of their growth and trajectory, the product design of how these products should look and what products we should be looking for in the marketplace or trying to help develop and foster. Overall workflow design of thinking through what are the different pipelines around different types of creation and what are the gaps, and bringing my knowledge of narrative design even into the process to when we're working with studios as they think through these new categories of experiences they want to support, and then working backwards to what would be needed to enable that on the tooling front. For immersive to kind of evolve into what we wish it to be and kind of its next evolution, it needs AI. And the reason that I say that is kind of the ultimate vision of a lot of immersive was that individual would feel really present in the experience, right? And to be able to do that as a designer, you either have to design a bespoke experience and put all of your money into developing one experience for one person so they feel really centered, or you have to design like a framework that's able to support stories and can adapt to different people as they make different choices within the context of that world. There's an ability to do that with where AI was to some extent, right? With procedural AI of having kind of checkpoints of decision making and different variations of what's possible within that. But to truly scale and make these worlds feel really navigable and respond differently to each person and create that full sense of immersion, you need kind of generative AI and where it's at, so that if I go up to a character and have a conversation, it's different every time. And it's not just like, come back later, or one of those kind of things that we have from like heritage gaming, but being able to have that unique responsiveness that understands the state of the world, the state of you as an individual, the state of the narrative, the state of the gameplay, and are able to pull all of those decisions and information together and constantly update it to make you feel like you're part of a living, breathing immersion that you just get to be in. Right now, education around immersive is typically a little fragmented. People find one thing they like about immersive and they're like, great, I love it, and assume that that's kind of the whole piece of it, right? And I think that happens sometimes with like themed entertainment. People love theme parks and you can specialize in it, but I think there are also more general principles you can learn around what does immersive mean, what are the different contexts it could live across, how are theme parks related to brand activation pop-ups, what are the shared rules, what are the different rules, and how can I as a designer maybe work between them or work in both of them. As a designer, especially if you're coming up, you have to be able to switch contexts and take those skills and kind of recontextualize and repackage them for new mediums all the time. But I think a lot of immersive courses don't necessarily know how to do that. I think at TXI, Erin really understands the context of immersive and the different kind of mediums that exist and how they're all different and what their affordances are, but also how to bring those overarching principles into your work and into your toolkit as a designer. I think that's rare, but I'm hoping that it continues to increase and that more students have access to that type of thinking. Weirdly enough, the things in immersive that get me really excited are physical immersive experiences. This is a bit of a throwback, but the Ship of Theseus book that was released by Bad Robot, I thought that was really fun. In a way, kind of immersive is like Building Stories by Chris Ware, which is a series of stories of people that live in a shared building and the way their stories intersect with each other. Those are all doing immersion in different ways. They're immersing you into the world through like a slice and a peek into the way that stories are connected in that world. And from a storytelling level that I really care about, I think virtual experiences, digital experiences, there are obviously some really neat ones that exist. And I think there's the potential for those experiences to get even cooler, which is the reason that I'm leaning into the AI space to enable that and looking at startups, for example, that support what that could look like. So for our first cohort, we focused on 3D cross-format creation. Basically the idea of what startups are supporting and thinking about building and enabling these 3D volumetric worlds that are responsive and that can then enable, in one hand, maybe virtual production, but also gaming or also open worlds. And we have startups there that are focused on one side on the engine, on engines that can kind of support these different rules and can pull in AI into enabling more modular and generative kind of interactions within the world. We have a startup, for example, focused on character logic and enabling both the scale of generative narration within it, but also the top-down ability to kind of control the states and narrative progression within characters. We have a startup that's working on kind of the very tactical issue around asset translation of if I want the asset to be enabled for VFX in my film versus I want it to be lightweight enough to be on my headset device and I don't want to rebuild the asset from scratch. How do I use AI to help me change what that asset looks like while retaining all, the best technical qualities of it? Being asked to be an Explorer-in-Residence was a huge moment for me. I was honestly really honored to be invited to be, first of all, part of that community of people both within UT Austin and within Texas Immersive that are exploring really incredible things, but also now this expanded network of others that have the same vision outside of the university. Beyond that, having the chance to come here and be a part of the conversation and share what I'm doing and how I'm thinking about how AI is evolving and to bring other people along in that journey and share that perspective has been really great. Within this year of AI that's happening, it's a really important moment, and it's nice that it's being checkpointed and signposted in this way of we're thinking about this and how it's going to evolve and how we're a part of it. And I think within that, we all need to bring our own principles and thought around how we want it to develop, and events like this give people the tools to know what they want to advocate for and how they want to play a part in this next evolution of technology. It's great being kind of a co-explorer-in-residence with Craig. We have such shared but also divergent perspectives, and it was great to bring both of those as things to the audience of these are both valid ways of seeing how the technology is evolving, and you can form your own viewpoint of how you want to think through it. I was so blown away by all the TXI students. They're all so curious and all so smart, to the point that I was talking about earlier about feeling so confused when I graduated. I don't think these students will be in the same position. I think they're leaving both with really tangible skills, but also with a sense of how to start applying it to the industry and what those roles could be. And I think that's so rare that you feel a confidence when you're graduating of, oh, there are opportunities waiting for me out there. That was really exciting to see that kind of hope and positivity in the students. If you're interested in entering this field, be very curious because things are always changing and you should be changing and adapting with it. Be very entrepreneurial. Think of yourself as your own brand and be adaptable of how you want to navigate the space and the roles that you want to take on. And you need to have a little bit of grit and resilience because it's not easy because things are always changing and because you have to kind of forge your own path. But that's what makes it fun.